officer to the prosecutor to the prison warders. Of course, talking about the judiciary and the discussion we're having right there. Bob Wino, Mark, the same applies to politicians from Nyanza, also thrived insulting the president. So it goes both ways. Politicians are the ones to blame and the bad manners that they have. But Bob, we are the ones who put all those politicians there. No one ever elects themselves into office. So we are also to blame. Thomas Lwangu, where Kenya is headed, we need intentional policies that is intended on holistically addressing this corruption menace. The BBI must have a clear framework on how to curb graft. Okay, Thomas, as the BBI technical team is saying, the report has not yet been tabled, so we'll wait and see how it shall address all those 9 points that we've spoken about. But let's move it along to a legislation that might take place, and this is in the Star, page 6 of the Star. Proposed law, organizers will need vetting and approval. Harambees to require licenses if this bill goes through and sails through. Now, Kenyans who want to hold Harambees are headed for strict scrutiny and a proposed law requiring them to obtain a license. So before you hold a fundraiser for whatever it is you need, you'll have to get a license either at a county level. If it's beyond counties, you'll get that from a national government level. But also, for those generous Kenyans who want to go and donate, you'll also have to declare the source of the money from which you're donating is from. Seems very complicated when you think about it, you know, because we're very used to being told on Friday, Nerima has a Harambee on Saturday. Yes. How will all of this actually be affected, Nerima?
Let me begin by actually passing the message across from Mark.
Oh, you're holding brief.
Yeah, okay. Before he left, Mark actually indicated that you cannot legislate generosity. And that's true because, you see, the tragedy with this country is that we usually have a very twisted mindset when it comes to developing laws and developing legislation. We never really take time to research and understand, is this law suitable and sustainable, and is it for posterity? The answer is no. What this is crafted or designed to achieve is just by a few fellas who are extremely uncomfortable. You realize actually that particular headline is captured with the deputy president. And you can tell actually what the message is trying to be passed across. The reality is it is really impossible to dictate unto people exactly how they come together to support each other on genuine causes. Why would I need a license, for example, if I have an emergency medical case? Why would I need a license to chase around a county commissioner or a sub-county administrator or whatever it is for me to get a license to be able to fundraise for that? What needs to be done is come up with regulations in terms of public fundraisers, like for schools and churches and that kind of activities. Because generally, especially for schools, there is never quite an emergency. If building a dormitory has never quite been an emergency. For a church, building a house for the priest in charge has never been an emergency. But now when it comes to ordinary Kenyans, this legislation is ridiculous. You realize it is unfortunate that there are people who can sit somewhere, and I would imagine that these people have some legal background with themselves to start coming up with the legislation for targeting one individual. I mean, what kind of madness is that? What we need is legislation that can be of help to Kenyans. If there is basic struggles, like perhaps Nerima wants to go to the UK or to Southern Sudan for further studies, right. Let's come together and support her, and we don't need anybody to guide on us. And again, you can't dictate how much I want to contribute to her fundraiser. Maybe I have only 10 shillings. Maybe I have 10 million shillings to give to that. But this idea of coming up with pieces of legislation just targeting individuals that cannot work, and it is ridiculous.
Nerima, yes. Ben says it's targeting one individual as far as this is concerned. But let's assume, okay, fine, it sails through and becomes law. In terms of, and this is what I was asking you as well, in terms of how practical this will be once if it did become law, in the sense that for you who's convening a fundraiser, go and get the license, and for everyone who will come for that fundraiser to declare where they got the money from, how will they actually get this into, actual implementation?
It's not practical. In fact, I wanted to ask, what are they saying the reasonings behind it? Is it that they're fighting corruption?
Yes.
Because that doesn't make sense. Because even though we declare, we remember that there were public officials who were asked to declare their wealth. Have they? I'm still waiting.
Right.
So what does declaring have to do with anything?
Right.
And so it is a waste of time, and it's a burden on people. I feel like it's very difficult to live in this country, and you're putting laws on things that are supposed to be social. When we talk about Harambees, it's supposed to be intimate. You're actually going and asking somebody for help. How many times have we entered maybe wedding groups, committees, and even funerals, to medical bills? These are things that are personal to individuals. And so when we talk about putting bills in place, it's like saying it's very difficult to live. I mean, last week we talked about WhatsApp groups and Facebook.
Right.
So you're just like, is the government going to regulate me to breathe?
Right.
I mean, it's crazy.
It's funny because Jen Karachi says, let them not regulate this, because at the end of the day, hata kama ni pesa ya kuiba, at least inarudia wananchi. So she's saying, okay, fine, if they want to fight corruption, let the money come back to us. If this is the only way it comes back through a church donation, then let it come back.
There was a very practical proposal during the Kibaki tenure, whereby, and actually that even became a law, whereby it guided or it prohibited civil servants and political leaders, that is state officers, because even an MP is a state officer. And it created very clear provisions in terms of how and where they can participate in Harambees, and there were specific limitations. So instead of coming up with these kinds of proposals that don't make sense, let's stick to that. Because if we have a legislation, and which to a large extent I would support, unless it is critical cases, like if it's a medical emergency and those kinds of cases, because if I am a member of parliament, you can't stop me from contributing to my cousin's fundraiser to go for medication, or even my constituent or any other thing. But now this other idea of especially churches and schools and all that has also brought in a very dangerous culture, because these people who have been going around contributing to churches and schools, buying buses and all those things, are not telling us why they are not providing sufficient resources to the Ministry of Education to construct schools like the tragic case we had last Monday of the Talent Precious Academy here in Nairobi. This week I've also seen a picture of another school that is a broken down grass thatched house in a constituency in the coast. Yet we have money to take to Harambees, but these individuals in government are not legislating. Even these MPs are always all over the country all the weekends doing Harambees, but they are not telling us what they are doing to ensure that we are constructing schools. Church is not really an emergency in this country. I mean, as a congregant, I can always decide how much I want to support my church. Right. But this idea of really focusing too much on the wrong areas, while there are critical cases, like instead of all these medical emergencies that we are talking about, why don't we have sufficient funding for healthcare so that every Kenyan can have access to affordable healthcare? Those are the issues that these kinds of legislation need to be focusing on.
And actually, you've led me to what I wanted to come to as well, because the reason why citizens are doing Harambees is because clearly there's a gap, because the hospital in my area can't give me the treatment I need. I need to go either to Kenyatta or abroad. So are we looking at the wrong thing? When Darago MP Jeremiah Kioni is talking about capping Harambee laws, shouldn't be looking at why every Kenyan needs to do Harambee for any particular, either it's education or health? Shouldn't that what both houses should be focusing on, and not capping how much you should give or declaring the sources of your money for Harambee?
Absolutely, and it goes back to the debate on when we even think about voter bribery and things like that, and what, when we talk about elected leaders should be able to give to their elected or their constituents. So we hear a lot of people saying, well, you know, the reason why we're corrupt is because we are being asked for so much. People come, they want you to pay school fees, they want you to pay for this and that and that. And then you're like, well, if the systems are fixed and people had access to these basic needs, then they wouldn't need to come to you for that. And where do you start? Because it seems like we're so far gone, you'll have to be able to fight two issues at the same time, simultaneously. And that takes both intentionality when it comes to building proposals and strategies, and also political goodwill. If there's no political goodwill, then there's nothing that will be able to be implemented in this country.
Right. And as we've seen, someone who could even say is the poster boy when it comes to fundraising in churches, the DP.
Yes.
I mean, if there was a weekend where the DP isn't fundraising in the church, it's, it's kind of odd. You'd wonder really what is going on.
Absolutely.
And again, you know, I always like the fact that if you're in a room with this particular individual, because he's the deputy when it comes to, you know, how this country is going, what did you tell him with the fact that, okay, fine, this is a law coming in, every single weekend you're raising funds. If you are actually doing your job as a government, probably you wouldn't need to be at every church raising 100,000 multi-million shillings.
Absolutely, yeah. In my view, and I'm on record, most of these fundraisers, especially by the deputy president, have largely been informed by escapist behavior, whereby he's running away from responsibility and accountability in the government that he co-leads as the principal assistant to the president. Believe you me, if it was indeed he was fundraising for causes that genuinely translate to uplifting the livelihoods of Kenyans, I would have no qualms with that. Whereby he would say, in the meantime, before we invest in the infrastructure to upgrade healthcare, before we upgrade the infrastructure for schools and all that, I want to be a part of this fundraiser to support these 200 kids to go to school and these 1,000 fellas to go for treatment and that kind of things. But now when you're talking about church, seriously, what value does, practically, let's look at the economic value that those fundraisers have added to this country. The answer is zero. So this is escapist in my view, because we are focusing too much, and every weekend we are reporting the deputy president doing things that are not adding value to Kenyans, apart from bribing communities out there who would want to, maybe in terms of showing support for his presidential bid. It has nothing to do with his core mandate as deputy president. It has nothing to do with any transformative agenda, whether it is within the Big Four or any other framework within government. It is, in my view, actually running away from responsibility. Right. And in my view, that is what needs to be tamed. If he was investing in schools and that kind of infrastructure, we would understand. But church, seriously, that is the last thing we need in this country. You've
spoken about economic value, and let's get into that. Perfect. So we get to talk about the economy and the business sector as a whole. Friday, we got the news that SportPesa was halting operations in Kenya. Bet in Kenya declaring redundant its entire staff, 400 individuals, talking about the business environment, and it's being not tenable for them to actually operate. KRA on their case, talking about the fact that it doesn't make business sense to pay what they're paying and still stay in business. They might as well move to where they can actually make business and actually succeed at that. Did we push this too far? Are they playing victim? Who's to blame? Because some people are now saying, okay, fine, for the 400 individuals and the families and the ripple effect, was there another way around this? Was it a money issue to blame? Because you're looking at what they were, if indeed they were stealing, they were still paying billions of shillings when it comes to, you know, the government coffers. And now that also, now in its entirety, has been scrapped off what the KRA was going to get eventually. So have they bitten more than they can chew in terms of KRA trying to enforce this and now losing everything?
I think for a lot of businesses, taxes are very difficult in this country, not only when we talk about major industries, also small to medium-sized businesses as well. But I do think when it comes to gambling, we do need strict regulations, which in our country we don't quite have. And there was a documentary, I think by BBC, where they were investigating the addiction to gambling in young people. And it was just based in Uganda. But you could see the similarities in terms of how young people get into it even as young as 15, which is something that we're seeing here right now, and it's becoming an addiction, and young people looking at it as a hope. And it's a hope because of lack of employment, and also lack of access, basically. And that's a concern for me, I think, at the moment. So when we talk about gambling regulations, countries have them, countries review them. The UK also just reviewed theirs from 2015. And the US doesn't allow each state to gamble. There are actually some states that refuse completely gambling. People will drive from Alabama to Georgia just to go and gamble. But when we talk about Kenya, this is where it gets fuzzy. We have very it's not equal across the board. It's not standard. We don't talk about the research involved. We don't talk about how it's affecting the population. And yes, it brings employment. As much as it's a vice, there's alcohol in this country, which is also a vice. It brings employment and resources to some. There's also other industries and other products that we can talk about that are not good for us, but they're still being sold in our country. So it shouldn't be that for gambling, we take out a major player. And I feel that it has made a lot of gaps in terms of even access to employment for a lot of people. You talk about 400 people.
Right.
And even a lot of these larger industries do make an impact in terms of our resources when we talk about taxes. So it's going to be a big gap for us.
And Ben, Nerima has raised something there, because some proponents who are for them just being shipped out is the fact that the whole moral discussion in terms of people getting addicted younger and younger, getting into this and find that this is a way they can actually eke out a living. But the gaming operators are saying that's not our fault. It's the fact that the government hasn't given them opportunities outside of what we are giving. If they had meaningful employment, this would be a pastime. But they're finding this is the only way out because the government of the day isn't delivering on their promise.
Yeah, actually, it is a very sad case of the double-sided, the two sides of that story. But on the one hand, really, as a country, we have to agree that gambling had reached levels that really can no longer be acceptable as a society. We cannot begin to normalize gambling as one of the key economic ventures that we can engage our youth to earn a living. We have seen cases of even university students committing suicide after betting with the entire term semester's school fee. We have seen cases where people actually have killed others just because they lost a bet or they lost a match that they had placed a bet on. That to me is not acceptable, because we have ended up creating a significant population of zombies, of young people who wake up and what their struggle is maybe to find 100 or 200 shillings just to place on an online platform and sit the whole day waiting for some miracle to happen in the evening and maybe earn some 2,000-3,000 bob. I mean, that's not really the culture we want to build a society on. But on the flip side also, you realize this concept of pushing the major betting firms on the issues of taxation. On the one hand, I really support that, because you realize these fellas, for the last about 4 or 5 years, have actually siphoned so many billions out of this economy that is actually benefiting only Europe and other destinations. We are not seeing any tangible returns on the Kenyan economy, except maybe small sponsorships that go to Gor Mahia and similar teams. So it was important at some point to agree that we can't trade like this. You can't be coming to my farm, use even my farm implements, till my land, plant whatever you choose, then actually cut away everything and leave me starving in my own household. It has never worked anyway. You cannot do that in any other economy. As a Kenyan, go to the UK, go even to Tanzania, right across here. You can't do that kind of business. So there was need to tie up those loose ends. But now there's also a challenge, because KRA needs also to tone down. Kenyans are not primarily responsible for the frustrations they are going through in terms of failing to meet revenue collection targets. They need to roll back and understand where the gaps are. And the efforts actually to clean up KRA internally is really an important step in the right direction. Because the problem was actually internal, not external. Kenyans really have never had problems paying taxes. Even if this taxation framework for these gambling firms was clear from the outset that 70% of your proceeds is tax, then it was agreeable from the outset, they would not have a problem. But now this idea of ambushing people and killing businesses overnight just because now you are frustrated is not really the way to go. They need to first sort the mess internally, because that way you will be able to expand the tax bracket. And also, for the president particularly, as I mentioned, focus more on economic activities that are translating to more Kenyans putting money in their pockets, because that's the only way you can raise taxes. This idea of frustrating and intimidating people is not going to work. But there's also something very important.
Not to jump on the point where you're talking about them taking a huge amount of their money and taking it to different countries and leaving us with basic cents and peanuts on that one. Some people are saying, okay, fine, even those peanuts that they're leaving are making a world of difference. When you see Harambee stars going for a camp, something that has never happened before, fully paid by a gambling operation, something that essentially the Ministry of Sports should be taking care of. But now the players can actually focus on just getting ready and getting their minds in the game. Might be peanuts for them, but the government can't offer that amount of money.
Now, you see, we cannot justify one sin because of the other sin. You know, it's an idea. It will be like, now my sin is better than your sin. What we need to agree is we can't sustain. That is not really the way to run an economy. What we need to be discussing is, why is Amina Mohammed unable to get Harambee Stars doing what they're supposed to be doing, or any other of the national or regional teams? Those are two very distinct issues. But now quickly, I want to mention on what you have there on the Business Daily, because that is a very important discussion Kenyans need to have. I'm on record, I think it is a week or two ago, when I indicated that instead of KRA looking for starting to tax pizza in terms of the fat tax, and instead of KRA chasing M-Pesa transactions, like if today I send, if I give Nerima 50,000 bob to go deposit on M-Pesa and send to Jeff, then she is taxed as an income. Let them focus on what we have been calling. We have been told we have billionaires, and I saw somewhere that currently we have about 300 or is it 3,000 billionaires in this country.
We are fourth in the continent. In
the continent. Wow. What we need is KRA now needs to come out and tell us, these billionaires, how much tax have they been paid? Let's go for those guys. That is where the problem is. Believe you me, it is not the mamambogo I paid last night 50 shillings for the skuma wiki I ate so that I can catch some sleep. Yes.
And because we've seen that since the new rules are put as far as betting and gambling operators are concerned, some have come back into operation. Others like SportPesa and Betin have closed shop. Some people are wondering, are there double standards on this? Why are some getting in and others can't be able to meet this particular threshold?
It's only a matter of time, because a lot of their advertising has been curbed, and that has a lot to do with influence in terms of being visible. And so we'll have to measure at the end of the day whether they are going to make an income or not. I think that it will make an impact in terms of their generating income.
And as we just wrap up on this whole story in terms of the betting issue, some people are wondering, is it a money or a moral issue? If SportPesa decided, you know what, how much do we owe the government? You're saying 250 billion. If they paid that and they decided, okay, fine, let's start a new slate, will we stop this moral argument that they've been putting against us? Because it seems like if you pay, then you can play. But as long as you're not paying the money, then you talk about how the gambling is addictive and all these other things. So is it a moral or a money issue on this one, Nerima?
It's a money issue.
They pay, they can play.
Issue.
And what are you, from where you stand, Ben?
No, actually it is entirely a money issue, because what we have is for KRA now to start rolling back, it is actually KRA who facilitated most of these guys to cheat on tax. So now it's unfortunate that now they are the ones who are carrying the big hammer, yet they are the ones who facilitated that. But Jeff, before we wind up, I think there's something very important on the headline of the Standard that we must be able to talk about. We have a proposal by MPs who want to come up with a bill so that they can hide some expenditure from the Auditor General. I mean, all the times we think we have received or we have seen the worst from our National Assembly. Who comes up with a law whereby they want not to be audited for expenses, so that an MP can decide I want to build a swimming pool for my constituents, and that is not audited? I mean, this obsession with avoiding accountability while utilizing public resources must actually be brought to an end. And this is a bill that should never see the light of day.
It's indeed, because they want to actually make it seem like it's a safe where they can go and, you know, just take the monies that they need for whatever it is they want to do.
Like what they used to call the confidential fund in Harambee House many years ago, whereby there was money just available for all manner of sinister operations. We can't go this direction.
And because, you know, when people read such a headline, and I'm sure they'll come to probably in forums like yours, how do you tell them that they can move forward in terms of holding their leaders accountable? Because you see this, probably it is your MP who's proposing this bill. What do you do, Nerima? Because these are young people feeling helpless, yet there's an MP somewhere who wants to put more money aside that you'll never know what they used it for. How do they take power into their own hands?
You know, we have the recall, and I think we're still in the open window for that in terms of seeing which members of parliament are pushing for this and following up with them. Public litigation. I think Okia Mtata is the one who's shown us that every citizen has that right to petition. And unfortunately, it's grueling time-consuming, expensive to do, and it's something that we encourage young people to be persistent about. So we are able to reach organizations that have that technical capacity to do that, but it takes organizing to do. And it's not something that's impossible. It's very possible.
Okay. As we wrap up, our good, bad, or ugly, we shall pick one because of time. We start with the fair lady. Your good, bad, or ugly for the week?
I think ugly. I think what happened in Mombasa is very sad in terms of the lorry. And I think we need better systems in crossing, even a bridge, for crying out loud. There are too many lives that are lost on ferries.
Right. Okay. And what about you, Mr. Mulwa?
My ugliest was the accident that happened at the Precious Talent Academy last week. This is something that was completely avoidable, preventable. Unfortunately, we have individuals within the county administration who have been overlooking in terms of inspectorate. Inspecting these buildings and certifying buildings for occupation. And it is a tragedy actually that these kinds of activities continue unabated, yet we have officials who deliberately refuse to do what they are paid to do. And I want to laud the governor, Sonko, for sending some of those individuals home, because at some point people must begin to take responsibility. We can't be exposing our children to that kind of danger.
And that's why we're going to leave it as far as it's concerned. Thank you so much, Ben Mula, for sharing your time. 1.5 hours, of course, just looking at the big stories of the day. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so
Nerima Wako, of course, thank you so much for coming on as well. And Mark Bitachi, in absentia, been held for brief by Mr. Ben Mula on this last half hour. This has been your newspaper review this morning. Please keep the tweets coming in, the SMSs as well. The SMS line is 21222. The tweet, you can get us our Twitter handle at K24 TV. Take a short break. We're back with what has been trending.